No? Thank you. And everybody else. I've explained before that we're not actually, bizarrely, allowed to launch reports in the Scottish Parliament. So we're not launching this report. We're talking about it. And it will be officially launched on Tuesday. So the report done by this group, it's called Mind the Gap, Tackling Transport Inequalities in Scotland. It covers 4 themes: poverty, children and young people, gender and disabilities. And of course we had a number of meetings, and some of you were at those meetings and you've contributed very much to the report. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to hear from the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Fiona Hislop, and then Laura from Transform will go through the report and just pick out the themes from it. And then Fiona's going to have to leave. She's got another transport-related event to go to. So she'll leave around about 6:30, and we'll have a panel who can discuss the various aspects of the report, and then a question and answer session. And we might actually get that all done in an hour. You never know. So I'll start by inviting Fiona Hislop to say a few words. Fiona.
Thank you very much, Graham, and I'm very pleased to be with you, having last attended the launch last year of the previous report, the Fossil Free Future Report. I want to start by offering my thanks to Graham Simpson. Graham has been a long-standing interested champion of transport, and good to see that continue, and obviously my colleague Mark Ruskell as well. And I think in terms of the advice that all of us receive, both as individual MSPs and also government, for many people in this room, is very much appreciated, and that's what participative democracy, this place is meant to be all about, reflects. So thank you to Colin Howden and everyone who's been involved in contributing to the new report, Mind the Gap on Transport Inequalities, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Laura in particular. I can't stay for the full night because I've ended up being double booked, but I did meet with Transform Scotland on the 12th of March this year, and we discussed the report. So I'm sure everyone in the room is looking forward to spending the evening discussing the findings, as well as the opportunities and the challenges of delivering a transport system that provides that fair and reliable access while tackling poverty, inequality and the climate crisis. So evidence does show that the current transport system drives inequalities and disproportionately impacts those already affected by these inequalities, whether that's by gender, disability, income or race. And you'll be aware that our public consultation recently closed on our draft Transport Just Transition Plan, setting out the key opportunities and challenges, such as transport poverty, which is a key aspect of tonight's report associated with reaching a just transition to net zero in the transport sector, and our commitment to publish a renewed policy statement on car use reduction, which will be delivered very soon. So I mention this as we know that car ownership at the expense of other transport modes and a lack of reliable transport alternatives drives inequalities, as it means that some people cannot easily access key services that others can with a car who have a car can. So this pushes people into poverty, as they need to own a car they can't afford. So we also know that a lower percentage of disabled people possess a driving licence, 55% versus 77%, and a lower percentage have household access to a car, 57% versus 80%. Lower income households, minority ethnic communities, women, particularly older and disabled people, are less likely to own or use a car. However, the negative effects of car use, air and noise pollution, road danger, community severance and congestions fall disproportionately on these same groups. So the current system has helped create and exacerbate this situation, so reducing car use in Scotland and supporting sustainable alternatives will therefore make it possible to reprioritise space and investment in accessible streets and public spaces to ensure inclusive and affordable access by walking, wheeling, cycling or public transport for those that don't have access to cars. The Scottish Government has a just transition at the heart of its actions as we move to decarbonise the sector and deliver fair, reliable access while tackling poverty, inequality and the climate crisis. This aligns to the vision that was set out in the National Transport Strategy that sets out our aims for a sustainable, inclusive, safe and accessible transport system and to deliver a healthier, fairer and more prosperous Scotland. So I think you're all aware of this. I suppose what I want to express in my remarks is there's a lot to do. There's an enormous challenge. We are making progress, but there's a quantity of distance still to travel on this. So delivering on these principles, over 2 million children, young people, disabled people and older people in Scotland are now benefiting from the free bus travel, making over 3 million journeys every week. And since January 2022, over 200 million bus journeys have been made across Scotland by children and young people under 22 using their free entitlement, helping them and their families cut costs for essential and leisure travel. And recognising the challenges that our young people who live on Scottish Islands can face, in a few weeks' time from the 23rd of June, young people aged 19 to 21 who live on Scottish Islands will be eligible for concessionary ferry vouchers for travel between their home and the Scottish mainland. And from 1st of September, the Scottish Government are also abolishing ScotRail peak rail fares permanently to encourage more people to travel by train, to reduce car journeys, help existing peak time rail passengers with the cost of living, and that will obviously help people with ongoing cost of living pressures, helping to tackle child poverty, which again is one of the First Minister's priorities, and tackling the climate emergency. And I was always of the view that you would need to have a long-term sustainable reduction to see an impact. And I'm managing expectations that we still may need that to see the difference, but having those fares abolished permanently will be, I think, highly significant in that effort. So in addition, the Scottish Government pilot scheme has been providing free rail travel for companions of blind and partially sighted people since the 1st of April 2025, running forward. And the pilot applies on all ScotRail train journeys across Scotland and aims to make train travel more affordable and accessible for blind and partially sighted passengers by introducing a consistent nationwide policy for free companion rail travel, aligning with existing concessionary bus and ferry travel across Scotland. And I would want to compliment Graham Simpson on being very persistent in this area and championing it, as indeed Mark Ruskell has been, and some of the other areas about young people and fares. So I want to say that at the end of the day, I have to make things happen, and I have my own ideas and want to make things happen. And the challenge of making things happen is something that, I've got the responsibility, I've got the honour and the privilege of doing, but, part of that is making that happen. It's so much easier to do so when you have got support from colleagues in these areas. So we're also, this year, we've allocated £3 million for a £2 bus fare cap pilot, which I know Mark Ruskell was particularly interested in, to take place within a regional transport area. The pilots will commence in January 2026 for 12 months and hopefully encourage more people to choose to travel by bus for work, study and leisure. And these are just some of the actions that we've taken to address inequality in the transport system. So I want to finish by thanking all the members of the cross-party group and Transform Scotland for the Mind the Gap report. It is challenging, and that's what I think it should be. But I hope you can see, even since we met in March, there's some progress in some of the things that you've been asking us for. I won't be able to hear all the discussions tonight, but I do look forward to reading and considering the report and its recommendations in all the detail and with the reflections from individuals here. So thank you for the invitation. As I said, much to do, but you've got to have a bit of momentum to make things happen, and that's what I hope I've conveyed tonight.
Thanks very much, Fiona. And I've always found you really good to work with, and it's good that you've listened to my common sense approach to transport, and indeed Mark, and introducing things like the free travel for companions and blind and partially sighted people. I think that's excellent. So thanks once again. And I'm going to bring in Laura Hyde-White at that point. If there's any time, there might not be, if there's any time, we could maybe lob a couple of cheeky questions at the Minister. But Laura,
Okay.
if you spin it out for 10 minutes, you'll get off the hook.
Great. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks Graham. Thanks Cab Secretary. I'm Laura Hyde-White, Public Affairs Manager at Transform Scotland. We're the National Alliance for Sustainable Transport, and we act as a secretariat for the cross-party group. So over the past year, we've led the inquiry into transport inequalities and pulled together the final report, Mind the Gap, which we're launching next week, as Graham said. And before we hear from our panellists, I'm going to take a few minutes to walk you through what the CPG set out to do, what we heard, and what we're asking the government to do next. I've got some slides, but it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. It's just a whistle-stop tour of the key themes and findings to set us up for the panel discussion. Next week's report will go into much more detail than I'm about to now. Next slide. So why inequalities, why now? As we've heard from the CabSec, we had a nice introduction there. But in the past, the CPG has tackled strategic issues like traffic reduction and decarbonisation of public transport. But this year, we asked the question, what does it actually feel like to get around in Scotland today? And does transport take people where they need to go? Because transport isn't just about getting from A to B. It's about access to opportunity, to connection, to everyday life. We've known for a long time that we need more people using public transport and active travel for climate, for the health, and more. But the reality is too many people face barriers that make those options unrealistic. So the CPG is putting this issue on the table and pushing for the change that's long overdue. Next slide. So over the past 12 months, a year ago today, actually, we had our first session. The group held evidence sessions looking at how transport is experienced by low-income households, women and girls, children and young people, and disabled people. Across the board, we heard the same thing. Transport in Scotland is not working for everyone in Scotland. For low-income households, the system can lock people into poverty, especially if it doesn't connect you to jobs, school, or day-to-day journeys. If buses are unreliable or too expensive, people are pushed into car dependency or cut off completely. For women, we heard that the way transport is planned and funded often prioritises traditional 9-to-5 commuting patterns, typically intercity centres, over the more complex everyday trips that women are more likely to make. That means journeys to the shops, the school run, or the GP often take longer or require multiple changes and aren't served at all. Safety concerns also came up repeatedly, especially when routes are poorly lit, isolated, or feel unpredictable. Children and young people rely heavily on public and active travel, but services can be patchy or non-existent. And even with free bus travel, we heard that it's sometimes not reliable enough to make sustainable choices. For disabled people, we heard that safety and accessibility still aren't designed in from the start, and they're seen as optional extras rather than essentials. The numbers are stark, considering that women make up 50% of the population, children and young people 20%, 1 in 5 Scots identify as disabled, and 1 in 5 are in relative poverty. So we're not talking about minorities here, we are talking about the majority of the population. Next slide. Across all these groups, the same core barriers came up again and again. These were cost, availability and reliability, access, safety, and not feeling represented. Underpinning all of this is a deeper issue, transport poverty, which I'm sure Margaret can talk to you more about, where people lack access to transport that is available, reliable, affordable, accessible, and safe. Unless all 5 are met, transport doesn't support a decent quality of life. So how do we fix this? We've pulled the ideas from our evidence sessions together into 2 headline recommendations. Next slide. First, we need a clear national definition of transport poverty, because if we don't define the problem, we can't tackle it. Defining it allows us to measure it and see where people are being left behind and where support is most needed. To do this, we also need better data to understand travel habits according to income, gender, disability, age, and geography. And without this, transport planning risks being shaped by defaults, not real people's day-to-day lives. Next slide. And secondly, we need to embed fairness into how transport decisions are made. Many of the witnesses told us the same thing. Scotland's transport system often feels like it's built for a default car user, someone with a 9-to-5 schedule or no access needs. But that's not the reality for many people. So we're calling for 3 practical changes. They are co-design transport with marginalised groups, implement equality budgeting to ensure investment reflects real-world travel patterns, and measuring how transport plans affect well-being with health impact assessments. Next slide. So these 2 recommendations address the root of the problem. Transport decisions directly determine where we live, where we work, and who we connect with. If we don't build fairness into the system, we're locking people out of opportunity by design. While we may not have covered everything and every single gap with this CPG work programme, the Mind the Gap report is a catalyst for more attention and, crucially, more action on this topic. Thanks again to everyone who gave evidence to the group, some of whom are on the panel, and now have the joy of being quizzed by you lovely people. Thank you for listening, and back to Graham.
We've got 4 minutes to quiz Fiona Hislop. You got longer? And Laura. Right, hands up, online, virtual hands up. You're not all going to get in, so I'm just going to pick you first. Press your button so your mic comes on. That means the people online will hear you, and say who you are.
Thanks. My name is John Lauder. I'm from Scotland's Railway. The question is principally for Laura, but the Minister may want to comment too. Laura, did you look at the gap between integrated transport and the impact that that can have on a lack of ability and a lack of freedom to be able to transport yourself to where you want to get to? I'm thinking particularly the joined up timetables, for example. Also, bus and rail working in a more harmonious way than they have.
Thanks, John, for the question. The way the sessions were organised, it was focusing on experiences from these groups. So that's sort of a ground-up approach looking at it as opposed to taking it from these different topics. So we didn't look exclusively at integrated transport, but I know that did come up in a few sessions. I think in the Women in Transport session, there was talk about joining up these different modes, especially for trip chaining and things like that. If you want to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a key issue, particularly for women. Women quite often have its multiple journeys, and I think that's the bit that we need to tackle. And I think Laura's reflections that, you know, we're not a minority, you know, we're a majority, but the system in the past, you know, it's how do you evolve from the past, and integrated, and that connectivity is absolutely crucial, and there is progress on that, which is good. What we're seeing, but I do think it's actually, you need to not just look at it from a top-down. Almost like rail drives everything. It's actually where are women and where do they need to get to, as opposed to what makes sense for the rail timetable to link to everybody else. So it's how you look at it.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. We have a strategy.
I need to let somebody else in, just to be fair.
Send me your strategy.
I'll do that.
Yes, yourself. Yeah.
Is it that one? There we go. Yeah. I just wanted to say, on behalf of myself and people I know with sight loss, my name is Aaron McHale and I'm registered blind, and my comment is really just to thank the Minister and Scottish Government and MSPs here for championing the policy around companion concessionary travel. So I think that will make a meaningful impact in the lives of people across Scotland who are blind and partially sighted. So personally, I want to thank everyone who supported that, and for the government for pushing forward with that.
Thank you for recognising that. And I said it's, you know, lots of people have been championing this, not least lots of organisations in this room. And I think making sure we get the benefits from the study as well, and sharing it, and also publicising it and letting more people know about it. I think it did get good coverage at the time, but we could probably think about doing more with that.
Yeah, a bit of marketing probably. That would help. Do you need to leave?
I've got one more question.
One more question. Okay. Yes, you did have your hand up.
The right-hand one says speak.
Okay, I'm Chris Day. I'm from Edinburgh Bus Users Group, so I'll ask the cheeky question. Don't you think that, or do you think that Scotland's political classes, for want of a better phrase, are failing public transport users by, in particular, seeming to think that everything can be sorted by concessionary fares? We heard in one of these sessions from the young Scottish Parliament that the value of a bus pass in Inverness is £30. In Edinburgh, it's £100. I mean, a concessionary bus pass is no bloody use if you don't have any services anywhere near you, which is probably large parts of Scotland. And I don't see anything in the Scottish Parliament that suggests that Scotland's politics is going to break out of that. So my question is, do you agree with me? And if you do, how can that be changed?
So I don't agree with you, because we've had good discussions, not least on the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee, about how we use almost £500 million of funding, the majority of which goes into concessionary fares, and how we can then use that to actually be more strategic, as opposed to just support people with concessionary fares in and of itself, how worthy that is in and of itself, particularly for older people and for younger people. So I think there is a challenge there as to how we can actually use the funding that we have from the Scottish Government provided to the sector in a sensible way. But people are very, very supportive of their concessionary fare. And you're right, if you look at the take-up rates, West Lothian, where I represent, if you look at the young people's take-up rate, it's much less. Why is that? Because most of our transport systems go east-west, and most people want to go north-south, and actually there's less of a provision. So I think our politicians of all parties are very conscious from their own constituency mailbag and also the discussions in the Parliament. We need to be sensible about how we use funding. But the concessionary fare scheme is a very precious asset for many, many people. We just have to think carefully about how you can actually use the system to get the benefit of the concessionary scheme, but also be able to use it in a far more strategic way. And I think that's one of the big challenges going forward. So I'm hopefully giving you a bit of hope and perspective. But that was part of the questioning of me on the at the Net Zero Energy Transport Committee when I was there discussing budgets. So it is a lot of things in transport take longer to work through for understandable reasons. But thank you for the questions, and I think that was a good question.
And you don't have to agree with people. So just before you shoot off, the £2 bus fare pilot, have you decided where it's going to be? Not yet, but there's lots of representations. I mean, I think the balance is how do we make sure, because there's other things around it, and the discussions I think I've had with a number of people is do you choose, and it's actually Jim Fairley who leads on bus issues, who's leading on this, but obviously there's more to it than just the fare, because it's you have to have an infrastructure behind it. So making a decision as to do it so that you can prove a success, or to just have something from ground, from very little provision, that reflects the last question. If you have a £2 fare cap in a place that doesn't have that good of bus infrastructure, you're not necessarily going to see the behavioural change, and it's the behavioural change that we want to try and push. So it is quite complex in making that decision. Okay, obviously it should be Strathclyde, but I'll let you go on that. Okay. Right. Thank you. All right. Thanks for your thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks. Apologies to the person online with their hand up. I can't quite see your name, but maybe we'll get in at the next session. We're going to have a panel now. We've got Margaret Douglas, Dr. Margaret Douglas. We've got Heather Williams, David McGill, who's from the Youth Parliament, and online, hopefully, is Lynn Pornaro. And they've been told they've all got 60 seconds, which is quite a challenge, 60 seconds to say, just give reflections on the report recommendation relating to your area. So we'll start with Margaret.
Thank you very much. 60 seconds, no pressure. I've got 4 things I want to say very quickly. First one is there's no question that transport poverty is a really significant issue for health, for all the reasons that the Cabinet Secretary flagged up in terms of lack of access to essential services and the harms that a car-dominated environment causes. So that was the first thing to say. The second thing is really welcome the report, particularly welcome the recognition of the multidimensional nature of transport poverty. It's not just affordability, as we've heard, it's also accessibility, reliability, availability and safety. I was testing myself there. third thing to say is really welcome the approaches that are recommended within the report, particularly the use of health impact assessment, which is used prospectively to make sure that plans and policies are designed and implemented in a way that maximises benefits for health and also minimises any risks to health and health inequalities. So really pleased to see that, and Public Health Scotland has lots of guidance and support available for that. And the final thing to say is I do really welcome this report, but this is a really huge issue and we really need to do more. We really need to do more to invest in sustainable transport options, make sure they're available for everyone in Scotland. And part of that is addressing the underlying car culture and assumptions that we all have in the back of our minds that means that we end up prioritising cars because we assume that people will travel by cars. If we make the assumption that people should be able to travel by sustainable and active transport as the first assumption, then just think of the change that we might see in terms of health, equity and sustainability. Was that 60 seconds?
Well, almost, but very good, impressive. You've set the bar high. Good. And I should have said Margaret's a consultant in public health at Public Health Scotland. So next up for the 60-second challenge is Heather Williams, training lead at Scottish Women's Budget Group. Heather.
Thanks. Unsurprisingly, you'll be surprised to hear that we're very happy to see equality budget included in the recommendations. And I suppose for us, ultimately, if we don't make sure that the outcomes that we're trying to achieve are built into our budgetary processes, then we're never going to change anything. So seeing that is really important, as well as the recognition that we need proper, good disaggregated data that tells us about the places that people want to go and need to get to. As the Minister says, for women, that's really important in terms of that trip training. You need to be able to get to the nursery, you need to be able to get to the GP surgery as well as getting to your work. So glad to see those things.
That was under 60 seconds. Brilliant. Right, so David McGill, let's see how you get on with this. David's a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament. He's on the Transport, Environment and Rural Affairs Committee. And of course, we heard from you and your colleague at one of our sessions. David, off you go.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'd just like to thank you all for listening to me for my 60-ish seconds, and obviously apologise for Isla, who couldn't make it herself tonight, who I'm sure is ready to hear all about it when I get home. We obviously welcome the report and we look forward to working alongside, to continue to work alongside everybody in here. It's especially talking about, it's not just the affordability, it's the accessibility. Just a wee bit before my time joining the SYP, there was the All Aboard campaign, which in a roundabout way sort of led to the introduction of the bus pass concessionary. And that was also trying to look at expanding it to the likes of ferries and the likes of trains. It wasn't just about the kind of concessionary aspect, it was also about making sure there's more accessibility to routes, better infrastructure, and safety is a big one. There was recently, at one of the most recent sittings, there was a motion passed in which, don't have the number, it might be 97%, we'll have to check, of the membership supported 24/7 security, CCTV on likes of buses and trains, and would also be looking to introduce the likes of places to stay, refuges for ferry terminals and buses that are a wee bit under par at the minute. But again, we'd just like to thank yourself, Chair, and thank everybody for giving their views. We've consulted with young people, and as Graham had mentioned, we spoke a wee bit. God, when was that? March? Before March? A while ago, anyway. And I truly feel that the voices of young people have been reflected in that report, and we do welcome it as SYP. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Massive failure, I'm afraid, on the 60-second challenge, almost double the time. So finally, Lynn Panaro, Chief Exec at Disability Equality Scotland, who should be online, hopefully.
I am.
Lynn.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I can't be with you this evening, but I'm here virtually. We at Disability Equality Scotland also welcome this report. When we look at the 4 categories that have been looked at, we have to say it's all that intersectionality, isn't it? Disabled people are in poverty, disabled people are women, disabled people are children and young people. So we welcome that and looking at all aspects to see how we can make improvements of that accessibility and to define what actually is transport poverty. Disabled people often have to use private transport, whether that's taxi or their own cars, because the vehicles are just inaccessible. And it's not just about the actual vehicles, it's about how we get there and whether or not we can actually get on the train, get on the bus, especially if there's 2 disabled people coming along at once. So we really look forward to working alongside everyone to continue to identify this, take on board the recommendations and actually work together and speak together so that we can make an improvement.
Thank you, Lynn. Now I'm going to open it up to the floor, and I'll promise you I'll try to bring people in who are online this time. So over to you, and try and speak to the issues that we've raised in the report if you can. Yes, Ellie.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellie Harrison. I'm a volunteer with Get Glasgow Moving and Better Buses for Strathclyde, so may have a slightly Strathclyde focused question. Yes, I brought with me a copy of the Strathclyde Regional Bus Strategy produced by SPT, which I think does solve a lot of the issues that we're talking about here in terms of inequalities and providing an integrated public transport system across the region that is affordable for people to use. So I guess what, just to open it out to the whole of Scotland, there are some obvious inequalities in the system that we're all aware of. The cost of bus fares is one, and the availability of public transport. Just to compare, single on First Glasgow is over £3 now, and I think it's just over. Chris will know how much it is on Lothian. It's nearly £1 less. So my I think these things could be addressed by 2 simple things: national standards that the government sets, and then regional delivery of the services that we need, and that's what SPT is planning to take forward. So I guess I wonder why that there isn't anything around a national fare structure, like how much it should cost to get on a bus, no matter where you are in Scotland. It would be good if that was something that we work towards. And something that Margaret said as well, like the right to public transport, like how can you, what sort of service can you be expected to have provided for you no matter where you live? And that's something that Aaron was also talking about.
Okay, I'll take another contribution online this time. I think somebody called I. Brown.
Yeah, that's me. I'm Iona. I'm Mark's researcher actually. I have 2 questions, so I'll just punt them out because they're similar. The first one's sort of on the report itself of we had, Lynn had mentioned that intersectional view of it, but I was wondering if there was an actual intersectional analysis done from the different groups that were taken. So obviously you had the gender and transport, the disability transport, but if any of those, obviously you said there was common themes, but if there's any actual intersectional analysis done of it, because we do see a lot of overlap with that. And then also sort of second question of, the recommendation of embedding fairness notes equality budgeting. So I was wondering if there's also an aspect of having gender mainstreaming or equality mainstreaming, if that's the language you want to use, of the actual physical design of how we're designing transport to make sure that the broad range of intersecting inequalities are actually taken into account in design. That's me.
Okay, any of the panelists want to pick up any of that? Stunned into silence.
I know I'm not on the panel, but I just thought I would address Ellie's point about the national fare structure and why that's not a recommendation. And just to sort of be more explicit about the report was the evidence presented by the witnesses, and that wasn't something that was led as a recommendation, but the transport poverty, the gender budgeting, those are the things we picked up. So yeah.
That's not to say, Ellie, there's not support for lower fares, and indeed the bus fare cap that the Cabinet Secretary is going to pilot. And I noticed actually the UK government is extending the £3 cap in England for another few months, which I think is positive. Whatever you set it at, as long as it's low enough, it makes it more affordable. Yeah.
I suppose in terms of kind of both Ellie and Iona's questions is that, and it goes back to what the Cabinet Secretary was saying, is fundamentally our transport systems are not designed to meet the needs of a lot of people within our communities. In terms of, I've been up in Aberdeen today, we've just launched a report around gender inequality and poverty and what causes that within an Aberdeen context, and unsurprisingly, transport comes up. Affordability, reliability, accessibility, and the impact that it has, particularly obviously from our perspective on women in terms of being able to get to places that you need to go to undertake the caring responsibilities that disproportionately lies with women, and then to be able to undertake that paid work which addresses which is ultimately the way in which we can address kind of poverty and inequality. And our systems, despite the amount of money that the Cabinet Secretary was talking about that goes into this, actually causes these problems. So we are funding a system that creates the inequality and creates poverty for so many people within our communities. And what I suppose for me is that, Iona was asking about gender mainstreaming. Absolutely, we need gender mainstreaming. We need to understand how the way we currently do things causes the inequality, how it exacerbates and embeds it further, to be able to address that. And I suppose, sometimes the elephant in the room when we're talking about public transport is the commercial element of it. And that money that the Cabinet Secretary is talking about is going to private companies who create the difficulties that we're talking about through the commercial element of it. And that is something that is a real issue in terms of that right to transport. If we're taking a kind of thinking about it from an equalities perspective, if we're taking it from a human rights perspective, transport underpins so much in terms of why we have inequality within our communities. And if we don't look at what our responsibilities are to ensure that people can get from A to B, whether that be by bus, by train, walking, cycling, whatever way people are able to get to the places that they need to go to easily, then we're again, as I say, it's that whole thing about, for gender budget is about the outcome. What is it we're trying to achieve? And I think sometimes within kind of public transport we miss that. We put lots of money into it, but actually, what is our outcome? The Transport Scotland strategy talks about equalities. It talks about the diversifying the way, increasing addressing inequality through it. But when we look at the metrics and the numbers that we measure and what we look at, actually information and data about equalities is missing. And what is going back to our outcome? And I think that's something that, whatever perspective we take it from, in terms of what we're trying to address is what's our outcome? What do we want to be different? What is this money meant to be delivering? And at the moment, I don't think we can say that for so many groups. Does the investment that is made at so many levels, does it actually meet people's needs? Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. Apologies.
No problem. That's what you're here for. Dave Defoe.
Hi, thanks very much, and very welcome to the report, and thanks for all the work that's gone into it. The report thinks of inequalities in terms of categories of people, for example, women, people in poverty, people with disabilities. But there's another type of inequality that we should possibly look at, and that is your nearness to transport facilities. And whatever your age or income or disability, being near to relevant transport facilities is very important. Chris Day mentioned this in his question to the Minister in terms of proximity to buses, but I would like to also point out it's a very similar situation with regard to proximity to high quality cycle facilities. And Cycling Scotland has published figures this year to show huge increases in cycle use in those places where segregated cycle facilities have been increased. Some in Glasgow and some in Edinburgh where Spokes is based. And not only has been very large increases, but it's also meant that people in categories such as women and children feel more able to get about by bike. So that's just really to make the point that your proximity to facilities is very important. And in terms of cycling, we're still at a very, very early stage where only a quite small proportion of the population lives near enough to these facilities. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. David, I just wonder if you could pick that up from a young person's perspective about the closeness of transport, buses, trains, and cycle facilities.
Certainly. I can come at it from a young person's perspective and also an Ayrshire perspective. We do actually have trains and buses in Ayrshire. I didn't get here by horse and cart, as some people might think. But I do understand the crux of the question. That is something that the SYP is trying to achieve with its consultation. That was something that came out when we spoke to our membership, spoke to our young people. It's, as I said, it's not just about the affordability. It's not just about how many buses you can run. It's about the routes. Ayrshire a good one for it. I know there's a lot of people who kind of get a wee bit of the Glasgow mind or the Edinburgh mind and they can't really appreciate it rurally. But there are so many people in my group that are rural, especially islanders, and it is a kind of really difficult thing for them to even get to the bus stops or whatever it is. And then even when they do get there, as I mentioned, there's very limited in the way of support, like stands or protection for the rain. And so it would be something we'd be looking to work with anybody who's willing to work with us, frankly, to improve and introduce.
Thanks, David. Jim, you just press that button so the press the button so the red light comes on.
Make it a wee bit closer to their mouths because it doesn't bite because we can't hear them.
Your red button's on now. You can speak.
Can't hear you.
Right. Hopefully everyone else can. We'll do our best. Yes.
Hi, I'm David Jackson from Consumer Scotland. I also would like to welcome the report. I think the national definition of transport poverty is really positive. I also am even more excited actually about the idea I thought I caught in the talk about measuring transport poverty. So forgive me for a little bit of a civil servant-y question here, but I'm really interested in how it will be measured, and will it be measured regionally, nationally? Will it be sort of broken down by the constituent parts of transport poverty? And the sort of second part of that question is there any commitment from government or from any other group to help measure that, I suppose? Thank you.
Yeah,
Margaret.
I'll take that one. So Within Public Health Scotland, I chair a group that's called the Public Health and Sustainable Transport Partnership, and a few people in this room are on that partnership. And we produced our report on transport poverty. And one of the things that we're doing as a follow-up to that is developing indicators of transport poverty. When we first started doing it, I think we thought we would have a single metric that would be a measure of transport poverty, and it became clear that that actually wasn't appropriate at all because it's multidimensional and it would just hide those differences. And so we're looking for indicators for each of those 5 dimensions of transport poverty. And looking at what's already in the National Transport Strategy Monitoring and Evaluation Framework, there's actually quite a lot of indicators already there that are relevant. It is partly identifying them as indicators that are relevant to transport poverty and then filling in the gaps. So we're not intending to produce something that sits entirely separate from all of the other planning structures. We really want it to be something that is part of the national planning sort of mindset within the NTS and within other national plans. But there will be indicators for each dimension. We will disaggregate them as much as we can. As Heather and various other people have said, often the data that are available are not very well disaggregated, so that's one of the things that we're looking at. And again, in terms of what level we can get them at, again, it varies. Quite a lot of it is available at local authority level, but not necessarily much below that in terms of geography. So it's quite a challenge to get indicators that are really useful, but it is something that we're really keen to do, because if you don't measure it, you can't see if it's getting better or getting worse.
And what's your timescale for that work?
Well, we've got a kind of, we've started working on it. We've been working on it for quite a few months now, so I can't give a definite timescale when we will have an agreed set, but it will be, I don't know, within the next 6 months, I would hope. We would have something that will at least be a start.
Thank you very much. Colin, you wanted in.
Yeah, I'd like to return to the recommendation about quality budgeting. So, Heather, when you gave evidence to the CPJ, you made a really strong case for gender budgeting. Obviously, we heard the other witnesses and they had different emphases. So we went for equality budgeting. It's something that's already in Scottish Government policy, so we thought it would fit lots of interests. So it was a bit of a compromise we did there. We understand that there's equality budget, gender budgeting in transport in Vienna. I think that's featured in the report. I just wondered if you and or the other panelists had other good examples of sort of worked experiences of gender or equality budgeting that have affected transport, or even just tried.
So going back to Michael? No, David. Oh God, sorry, apologies. I've travelled in for Aberdeen. I've been on the go since half 6 this morning. So, apologies. Was talking about, in terms of people's ability to get places, and when we're talking about transport and that move potentially from the car, the first mile and the last mile is so important. So when we look at kind of gender budgeting and that idea of kind of feminist urban planning, which is something that Vienna has taken the lead on, Barcelona is another place that's done a lot of work around this as well, about really thinking about space and and how we encourage people to use space, addressing some of those kind of safety issues that are particularly important for women, but for other groups as well. And it's about that analysis. Well, you've kind of mentioned kind of equality budgeting within the recommendations, and equality budgeting as an approach. I think one of the things that we need to make sure is that when we think about the outcomes and the targets which drive that equality budgeting, is that we do need to recognise that sometimes when we don't have a focus on gender, that women can disappear because we're not a minority, we are the majority of the population. And our analysis of last year's budgets for 32 local authorities, out of 32 local authorities, only one identified women as being disproportionately impacted by their budget decisions, despite the fact that all local authorities made cuts or changes to the provision of services in areas that are quite clearly gendered. So things like early learning, community transport, and school transport, things like that. So there's a danger that if we don't ensure that we have targets which quite clearly define the needs of women can get missed. And that's one of the lessons that I think there is from internationally in terms of that idea of having generic equality budgeting, is that actually the nuances in terms of how different groups and what they need is it can become a bit of a kind of hodgepodge, if that makes sense, and the different needs can be hidden.
Yeah, you want to come? I'll bring you back in now. Then I'm going to Mark Ruskell and then Jim Harkins, I think. Do you want back in, Jim?
Yeah.
You do, right. So Colin, Mark, Jim.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, the report does endorse the gender budgeting approach, so it's not as if we've judged against it in any way. But no, it's interesting to hear that perspective. And if there are other worked examples that folk have got, the other witnesses that could be brought forward, that would really help to make the case for that approach, whether it's gender budgeting or equality budgeting, to be made, I think. So maybe that's a challenge to the panelists to get their thinking caps on.
Quickly, sorry, I think, when we're talking about equality and gender, it's about the targets, it's about the outcomes, and it's about what is it we're trying to achieve. So that's the thing that's similarly when we're thinking about whether it's human rights budgeting, whether it's equality budget and gender budgeting, it's about the outcomes. So that would be the challenge that I suppose I would be laying down is actually what outcomes are we trying to achieve through the investment that we're currently making, and what outcomes would we want to achieve if we were to change the way in which we do things. And that's where, in terms of the work that Margaret's talking about, in terms of targets and indicators and things like that, what do we know about the gaps? What do we know about the inequalities? And what do we want to change? And that's what should be driving the investment, as opposed to necessarily making the investment and twiddling about with it to think, oh, well, we've put an extra couple of buses on that people in wheelchairs can get into, or we've done something to make it more accessible to other groups. Actually, fundamentally, what is the change that we want to see, and how does the investment drive that change?
Okay, Mark Ruskell.
Yeah, Fiona Hislop talks about reprioritising space and reprioritising investment. So if we take the approach of focusing on those outcomes, focusing on very much an intersectional approach to that as well, what would be your thoughts on what could emerge from that in terms of reprioritising space and reprioritising investment?
And can I ask, Lynn, you've not come in. I don't want to cut you out. So if you've got any comment on that, please speak up.
I'm happy to be listening as well with regards to it. I think in answer to that question, it's quite a challenge. So I'm coming from our members' point of view, disabled people. So we're talking about space quite a lot and re-looking at that, etc. And I think the whole concept is we want behaviour change from people. We want people to be utilising public transport where and when they can, active travel, etc., so that we are looking after our planet and that we've got these spaces. For disabled people, though, that is a real challenge at times. Just picking up on what Dave was talking about having access to spaces, whether it's green spaces, whether it's spaces for getting on the bus or the train, etc. Often those to get there are not accessible, first of all. The question, though, about the space on vehicles, or even width of paths, multi-use paths, etc., what we need to be looking at is does it suit disabled people? So often, if we want behaviour change, we need to start looking about how we're accommodating disabled people. And that goes for even thinking about what was spoken about earlier on about women who are the predominant caregivers and trying to get their kids to school because school buses have been shut down, those that have additional support needs with taxis, those have all stopped, etc. How do disabled people get to where they want to go to utilise the facilities they can? So, for example, I wonder how many of you have actually waited on a bus for it to come and for the bus to have space, but to be told you're going to have to wait for the next one another 20 minutes. And the next one comes along and you're told the same thing. And the next one comes along and eventually you're let on it. That's what some disabled people are faced with moving around Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, never mind those that are further afield. We don't redesign things. We don't redesign space for people and the avenues to utilise those vehicles, the space when they're on the vehicles, or to use, thinking about cycling, for example. There's a lot of disabled people who would love to be out cycling, but they require an adapted cycle. It's bigger, it's bulkier, it's more expensive, lower down. So if you're putting people onto cycle lanes, for example, on the road, they can't be seen in the same way, drivers aren't looking out for them, etc. We need to change that full behaviour to be inclusive. But to do that, we really need a whole transportation redesign. I had a new member of staff that started today, came into Edinburgh from Clackmannanshire, and to get there for 10 o'clock in the morning, she had to leave at 7:15 this morning because she had to hop bus to train, then down to on tram, etc. She was an ambulant walker. Had she been a wheelchair user, had she had mobility issues, that would have taken so much longer. And that's what we really need to be looking at, that redesign and getting that data. Because when we did the review into accessible transport a couple of years ago now, the data is missing and it's still missing.
Lynn, really well said. I think Margaret wanted to come back in on this.
It was partly on the space, but the first thing I wanted to come in was the Heather's point about women sometimes falling off the agenda. And I think that's where health impact assessment can actually help, because the first thing we do in a health impact assessment of any proposal is we talk through who are the different populations that are affected in different ways. And that includes women, it includes disabled people, it includes a whole lot of others. So we make sure we have systematically thought what are the differential impacts. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. So in terms of space, I mean, I think one thing that we identified in our transport poverty report was it's partly about transport policy. It's definitely also about spatial planning policy. It's also about the way that we deliver services and design them, and expect people to turn up for appointments at 9 in the morning when they've come from somewhere you can't possibly get a bus from. So it's about all of those things. So we need a whole system change. But a lot of that is about the way that we use space, and we do need to rethink our assumptions about what space is for. And we have a sustainable transport hierarchy, but we don't necessarily see that space is really allocated in line with that, or that investment is necessarily allocated in line with that. So we really need to sort of walk the talk about our sustainable transport hierarchy and really use that to drive decision making if we really want to see the change that we need to see.
Okay, thank you. Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The causes of transport poverty, there's been a good study done by Liverpool University, excuse me, where they've identified what causes it. There's a lot of folk who are on fixed incomes and they just go maybe 2 or 3 stops to the shops, what have you. They wait for the bus, they've got perishables, they've got frozen stuff, and the bus doesn't turn up. Or in the case of a young lady says they can't get on it. So they get a taxi. This happens 2 or 3 times. So they do their sums and say it's cheaper to get a car. So they buy a banger, which is the source of significant air quality pollution. And that's when the poverty starts. Because when you buy a car, you've got a hole in your pocket because it just takes away your money. And it hits those in particular in the poor transport corridors. We highlighted this on SPTR2 in the Glasgow corridors on the east-west, west-east, mainly along the London Road. The population hasn't changed, but there's no buses along the London Road to speak of. So consequently, there is an awful lot of bangers in service now. So I think this is an area we need to address the sources of transport poverty. Not necessarily give them money, but give them access to affordable, regular, reliable public transport.
That's the key, Jim. It really is. Is that Iona again?
No.
Online.
It is, yeah, sorry. It was just sort of to ask Margaret a follow-up on the health impact assessments and how the indicators will be disaggregated, because you said that they'll be disaggregated as much as they can, and I'm wondering what that actually infers, because we know that the more disaggregations we can get, so the more almost cellular they get, so not just a binary, you know, on disabled yes no, but the specific types of disability that people have, and looking into gender, making sure that those are also intersectional and you can cross apply it, like if that's being considered and taking into consideration, and if it's not, basically why not, because that's the good data that we need to be able to make a transport system that works for everyone.
I completely agree, but it's really challenging. I should separate out the health impact assessments from the indicators. So a health impact assessment is something you do in advance of implementing a plan or a policy to make sure that we get the best outcomes from it. So it's a systematic way of considering the impacts on health of that proposed plan or policy. Whereas the indicators are something that we're proposing will be used to monitor progress or otherwise in terms of transport poverty. What we're looking at is routine data, so we have to use what's there. We don't have a resource to go and collect, do new surveys or collect new data. So we're very reliant on what's already available. And that is the limiting factor. So I agree, we'd really like to have much finer grained data, all the intersectionality, but the reality is we probably won't get it to that level of detail because the routine data sources won't be able to tell us that. And we haven't got, we don't have the ability to go out and start running whole new surveys in order to gather that.
Okay, thank you. Any final point? I'll take one more. Yes, you're in luck.
So much luck, thank you. I was interested in the 60-second challenge because I don't think I've ever met a politician who ever managed to succeed at the 60-second challenge.
Right, you're now on the 30-second challenge.
So I'm going to be very quick. And the report talked about one of its recommendations being the importance of co-design. So I'm Robert McBean from SUSTRANS, just for the minute. The role that co-design can play, and something that Lynn said, I think would be a good point to sort of take forward, is she said we need a whole transport redesign, fundamentally rethink about all our transport systems. And my question is, because we've got a report coming out about disability and accessibility in transport, public transport and active travel within the next couple of months, and we are going to touch on this, is Lynn, where do we start? What should we start? What can we do to get that going?
I think we need to listen to the users. So we've with this report that we've got, getting launched next week, the Mind the Gap, we've looked at 4 kind of critical areas of categories of people. With regard to that, we need to start really listening to them. So often it's one size fits all kind of scenario, or we'll do the best we can for the majority of people. We actually really need to start looking at these people and find out, we know what the barriers are. We absolutely know what the barriers are. And then we need to start talking to each other. And in regards to that, involving people at a local level, when some active travel is being built in, we need to make sure that when the planning stage is happening, we're involving those people that are in transport poverty. We need to be thinking about that when we're thinking wider, etc. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, but you mentioned there about the elephant in the room, the commercial companies. They're all there to run a business. Of course they are, and that's part of our economy, etc. However, we need to start changing perceptions and understanding of other categories and what the barriers are to that. It's not just a case of, oh, well, you don't work 9 to 5, well, you should get a 9 to 5 job. Oh, you've got childcare issues and you're trying to get off to the nursery and creche so you can go to a training or college, etc. Or maybe you just want to go like to the theatre or something like that. Whatever it is we want to do in life, we need to stop thinking, well, individuals need to fit into what we've currently got, and actually saying, how can we change the service within the boundaries of what infrastructure we have? It's not going to happen overnight. What could we all do, one thing, to make things better? And that's about that step process, isn't it? About if we could do one thing that would make it safer for women to get to locations where there is proper street lighting and not bushes hung over, etc. Well, that's not just going to make women feel safe, it's going to make young people feel safe, it's going to make disabled people feel safe, and it's going to make the general public safe as well in that regard. So it's that kind of thing. If we're putting some cycle lanes in, for example, we need to be talking to the cyclists, but we want to talk to the people who we want to encourage to start cycling. We want to talk to car drivers, bus drivers, truck drivers as well in the roads, but we need to be talking to people locally, as well as that wider sense of nationally. We're a national organisation, so we talk to people across the whole of Scotland, but we've got our local access panels across Scotland to work with bus providers, train providers, taxi services, looking at all sorts of things, planning, active travel. I know some have been involved with SusTrans to look at that. What does it need locally? Because one size doesn't fit all.
Lynn, thank you very much. I think that's a good note to end the meeting on. Can I thank all the panellists who've attended, either in the room or online. I hope you agree that this has been and is an effective cross-party group, because we actually produced some work with some important recommendations. And we've just got, we've got less than a year to go of this session of Parliament, so we've probably just got about 3 meetings left. And we'll turn around another piece of work before Parliament breaks up, which will be at the end of March, I think. And then who knows who you'll get next session? Who knows? We'll wait and see. But we'll let you know the dates. We're probably looking at October, December, and February, but we'll work that out. I don't want to reveal the theme of the next. No, it's top secret, because I need to discuss it with the vice conveners and see if they agree. I'm sure they will. But with that, I'll close the meeting. Safe home, and hope you all get to see the final of Race Across the World, where they use various forms of transport, usually a lot more crowded than we are used to. So go and watch it. 9 o'clock. Trains, buses, sometimes taxis, and the old rickshaw. Thank you.